The human diplomats had no idea what they had just done. The conference room was filled with a tense air as the representatives of the galaxy's various species sat in their designated spots, a quiet hum of background chatter filling the space as everyone waited for the opening speech. The humans had been working on for months. It was their big moment. Humanity had just joined the Galactic Union, and this was supposed to be a milestone for their future in the cosmos. John, the lead diplomat, glanced nervously at the Kresk ambassador sitting across from him. The Kresk were a terrifying species. Their reputation was legendary. They were massive predatory beings with a culture built around violence and conquest. They had wiped out entire species and civilizations in their wake without hesitation. Their presence in the room was almost oppressive. The ceremony was simple: a few diplomatic pleasantries, and then a formal agreement would be signed by all parties, acknowledging the human race as full members of the intergalactic community. At least that was the plan, until John stumbled over one crucial line, his nerves getting the best of him. As he began to read the prepared speech aloud, he misinterpreted a symbolic gesture from the Kresk ambassador as a sign of submission. He had been told that the Kresk gesture was a tradition of peace, but what he didn't realize was that it was actually a declaration of dominance. Instead of following the script, John blurted out words that would echo through the galaxy forever. "By the authority granted to us, we hereby declare war on the Kresk species," he said with confidence despite the internal panic rising within him. The room went silent. All eyes turned toward the Kresk ambassador, whose expression remained impassive, but there was a flicker of something dark in his eyes. The tension was palpable as the diplomatic staff scrambled to make sense of what had just happened, but it was too late. The ambassador rose to his feet slowly, his massive form towering over the humans. His deep voice rumbled across the room. "So it is war then," he said, each word heavy with finality. The humans sat frozen, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what they had just unleashed. The galaxy held its breath as the Kresk ambassador signaled to his fleet commander. The signal was clear, and within moments ships began to activate across the galaxy, ready to deploy at a moment's notice. Back on Earth, the news spread like wildfire. A diplomatic blunder of unimaginable proportions had been made. Humanity had just declared war on the most dangerous species in the galaxy, and no one knew what to do next. Panic set in across the planet as political leaders and military commanders rushed to respond, but it seemed like there was nothing they could do to reverse the decision. The Kresk were not a species that would forgive such an insult. In the days that followed, the galaxy watched as humans scrambled to understand the gravity of their mistake. Alien species from all corners of the universe reacted with a mixture of disbelief and amusement. The general consensus was that humanity had just signed its own death warrant. But in the midst of the chaos, something unexpected began to happen. Humanity didn't crumble, they didn't fall into despair. Instead, a new sense of unity began to take shape. The people of Earth may have made the mistake of a lifetime, but they weren't going to let that mistake define them. Humanity would fight, and they would fight to survive no matter the odds. And so the stage was set for a war the galaxy had never seen before, one that would change the course of history and reveal what humanity was truly capable of. The reaction to the humans' declaration spread across the galaxy like a shockwave. Different species reacted in their own unique ways. Some laughed, others panicked, but the overwhelming sentiment was disbelief. No one expected the humans to survive the wrath of the Kresk. The Kresk had destroyed entire civilizations in the blink of an eye. Their warships were enormous and invincible, their warriors unmatched in their brutality. The idea that humans had declared war on them was nothing short of ludicrous. The galaxy's political leaders were caught off guard and scrambled to hold emergency meetings, convening representatives from dozens of species to discuss the implications of the human blunder. Some leaders saw it as a necessary evil, a sign that humanity had finally come into its own. Others were less sympathetic and began distancing themselves from Earth, offering nothing but vague condolences, while secretly hoping the conflict would end quickly. But the most shocking reaction came from the Kresk themselves. As the humans watched from Earth, the first waves of Kresk ships began to mobilize their massive battle fleets, setting course for human space. Their goal was clear: to obliterate humanity for daring to challenge them. Meanwhile, humanity's leaders were faced with a challenge. No one had prepared for it. Wasn't just about survival. It was about survival against an enemy that had never been defeated. No one had ever stood up to the Kresk and lived to tell the tale that humanity was united now more than ever before. They were not about to back down. On Earth, every corner of society rallied together as the government called for an immediate state of war across all sectors, while the people of Earth began to prepare in ways they never thought possible. The public responded in ways that stunned their leaders. People flocked to military recruitment centers. Civilians of all ages volunteered to fight, while engineers and scientists worked tirelessly to develop new technologies and weapons. For the first time in history, humanity was united in purpose. They were not going to let the Kresk wipe them off the face of the galaxy. No one knew how to defeat the Kresk, but one thing was clear: humans weren't going to go down without a fight. News outlets worldwide were filled with both fear and resolve as humans saw what was coming. The prospect of war on such a scale terrified the masses, but the overwhelming emotion was determination. There was no option to flee, no option to surrender. This was their fight, and they would stand tall in the face of it. The rest of the galaxy watched in stunned silence as humanity began preparing for the impossible. Even the Kresk watched with cold amusement at the futile attempts to defend against their might. They were known to crush any species that opposed them, and they didn't believe humanity would be any different. The humans had no fleet worthy of standing against theirs. They had no battle-hardened warriors to match their strength. But then something strange began to happen. Humanity wasn't backing down. They weren't showing the fear expected of a species about to be annihilated. Instead, they showed a strange kind of resolve, the kind of resolve that no one, not even the Kresk, could ignore. As the first Kresk ships entered human space, they found something unexpected: resistance. The humans had constructed defensive systems and weaponry that the Kresk had never encountered before. The surprise attacks were swift and fierce, unexpected, but most importantly, they were alive. The galaxy watched as the first shots of the war were fired. Humanity wasn't just waiting to die. They were showing the galaxy that they would fight with everything they had, and no one could ignore that. In the chaos of the early days of the war, the humans proved that they were more than just a mistake. They were a species capable of something that no one had seen coming: resilience. The Kresk were in for a fight that they had never experienced before. As the war raged on, humanity found itself pushed to the brink of extinction. But something extraordinary began to unfold behind the scenes while the Kresk unleashed their terrifying might across human space. A different kind of battle was quietly taking place on Earth, a battle not of weapons, but of the human mind and ingenuity. In the heart of Earth's most secretive military and scientific facilities, a team of engineers, military strategists, and rogue scientists worked tirelessly on a solution to the Kresk problem. They knew they couldn't win through brute force alone. That was something humanity had learned quickly when facing an enemy so terrifying and relentless as the Kresk. The human strength lay not in their size or their weaponry, but in their creativity and adaptability. Led by Dr. Helen Carter, a brilliant scientist specializing in ancient technologies, the team focused on a single relic recovered from a long-forgotten civilization that had once lived on the edge of human space. The relic was a mysterious, ancient device found buried deep within a mining colony's forgotten tunnels. When the humans first discovered it, they had no idea what it was, only that it was older than anything they had ever encountered. For months, the relic sat dormant in a research facility, with humans unable to decipher its purpose. It wasn't until the war with the Kresk began in earnest that they realized it might hold the key to survival. The device seemed to have the ability to disrupt energy fields, something that could potentially disable the Kresk's nearly indestructible warships. Helen and her team worked day and night, deciphering the relic's technology and reverse engineering it to create a powerful weapon that could interfere with the Kresk's advanced systems. They were far from ready to face the full might of the Kresk fleet, but if they could just hold on long enough, they might have a fighting chance. In the meantime, the Kresk continued their relentless attacks, sweeping through human colonies with terrifying efficiency. Entire cities were obliterated, and the human population shrank as they retreated further into their defenses. But amidst the despair, something remarkable began to happen. Humans began to think differently about the war. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about outsmarting the Gresk using unconventional tactics that no one could predict. They weren't following the rules of traditional warfare. They weren't trying to match the Gresk's brute force with their own. They were doing the opposite. They were using their small size, their ingenuity, and their ability to adapt to throw the Gresk off balance. The first major victory came when a human fleet, using newly developed cloaking technology and the device's energy disruptors, ambushed a Gresk warship in the outer reaches of human space. The attack was swift and precise. Catching the Gresk off guard, the warship's systems failed, and the ship was rendered completely useless in the span of mere minutes. It was a small victory, but it was enough to send a shockwave through both human and Gresk ranks. The humans had done the unthinkable. They had fought back using their minds and their creativity rather than sheer firepower. The Gresk were stunned. They had never encountered an enemy like this before, one that didn't simply cower in fear, but instead used its weakness as its greatest strength. They had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to find solutions in the most unlikely places, and the Gresk were beginning to realize that this war was not going to be as easy as they had thought. In the aftermath of the first successful strike, a new wave of confidence spread across humanity. The once doubtful masses now believed they had a fighting chance, and more importantly, they had the upper hand in a way no one could have predicted. Humanity was no longer just surviving the war. They were starting to fight back. The human victory over the Gresk warship was a spark that ignited a fire across the galaxy. Though small, it was a victory no one had anticipated, especially the Gresk, who were used to annihilating their enemies with little resistance. As the days passed, the Gresk fleet grew increasingly cautious, their commanders unsure of how to proceed against an enemy that fought so unpredictably. The next attack came swiftly. A Gresk fleet, hundreds of ships strong, descending upon a small human colony on the outer rim of the system. This time, however, humanity was ready. They had learned from their first victory, and now, armed with their newly developed energy disruptors, they set the stage for a battle unlike any the Gresk had seen before. The human fleet, though vastly outnumbered, moved with a precision and speed that caught the Gresk off guard. The human ships were smaller, more agile, and equipped with cloaking devices that made it difficult for the Gresk to track their movements one by one. The humans struck, launching surprise attacks that disabled Gresk warships with a single, well-placed shot. For the first time in history, the Gresk found themselves on the defensive in a battle, not with an inferior species, but one that was smart enough to turn their own tactics against them. The once unstoppable juggernaut that was the Gresk fleet began to falter, their commanders struggling to maintain control. As the battle raged, a small human task force led by Commander Rachel Carter, Helen's sister, launched a daring attack on the Gresk flagship, a massive vessel that was considered the heart of the fleet. The human task force knew they didn't stand a chance in a direct fight, but their objective wasn't to win the battle. It was to send a message. Rachel and her team launched their cloaked ships directly into the Gresk flagship's path, and just as the flagship was about to unleash a devastating blast on the human defenses, they fired a concentrated pulse from the newly developed energy disruptor technology. The pulse struck the flagship's command center and temporarily disabled its weapon systems and communication relays for a critical few minutes. In that brief window, the human task force unleashed everything they had, firing relentlessly at the weakened flagship while also managing to plant a virus into its systems, a virus that would spread through the Gresk fleet, scrambling their communications and rendering their ships vulnerable. The Gresk flagship went silent in the cold vacuum of space, its once glorious hull now filled with gaping holes from the human assault. For the first time in the war, the Gresk were left without a clear command structure. Chaos ensued as the fleet scrambled to reorganize and regain control of their operations. The human fleet, though battered, had done the unthinkable. They had struck a decisive blow against the Gresk, and for the first time in the war, the human victory was undeniable. The Gresk fleet retreated, forced to regroup and rethink their entire strategy. On Earth, celebrations erupted as news of the victory spread. But amidst the euphoria, there was a quiet realization. The The war was far from over. The Kresk had suffered a defeat, but they were still the most dangerous species in the galaxy, and they would come back stronger. The human victory was a wake-up call for both sides. The Kresk were no longer facing a species they could easily crush, and humanity was no longer the weakling of the galaxy. They had proven that with their ingenuity, determination, and adaptability, they could stand toe-to-toe with the mightiest of enemies. And so the war shifted its course. The Kresk would not be defeated by brute force alone. They had learned that lesson the hard way. Now it was about something else, something that would test the very core of humanity's resolve. The shock of the human victory against the Kresk flagship rippled through the galaxy like a tremor, unsettling even the most seasoned commanders across the universe. But while the Kresk fleet reeled from the unexpected defeat, humanity began to rise in ways no one had ever expected. There was a fierce new determination in the air, a unity that hadn't existed before the war began. Everywhere, from the bustling streets of Earth's largest cities to the far-flung colonies on the edge of human space, people worked together like never before. The war effort was no longer just the responsibility of governments and military forces. It became a collective mission for every human being. Every scientist, every engineer, every civilian now had a role to play in humanity's survival and eventual triumph. In the days following the ambush on the Kresk flagship, humanity began to capitalize on its success, organizing fleets and strike teams using the tactics that had worked so well before. But now, they had a new strategy to guide them. The Kresk had been left vulnerable by their overconfidence, and humanity was quick to exploit that weakness. Human ships began making calculated raids on Kresk supply lines, hitting their weakest points with surgical precision. Each attack disrupted vital resources for the Kresk war machine, forcing them to fight a battle of attrition as they struggled to replace lost ships, food, and weaponry while simultaneously dealing with mounting morale issues among their forces. In the midst of these raids, a new kind of human weapon emerged, one that didn't rely on firepower or brute force, but rather on psychological warfare. Humanity had learned quickly that the Kresk thrived on fear and intimidation, but what they didn't understand was the power of human resilience. Human guerrilla tactics became legendary for their audacity and unpredictability. Entire cities and bases were evacuated and repurposed into traps for unsuspecting Kresk forces. One such trap lured a massive Kresk battalion into a seemingly defenseless outpost that, when the Kresk charged in, was revealed to be rigged with advanced weaponry and environmental hazards that disrupted the Kresk's ability to fight effectively. In another bold strike, a fleet of human ships launched a feigned retreat from a system. The Kresk, eager for the kill, chased them across space, only to fall directly into an ambush that left their forces devastated. The Kresk were beginning to realize that humanity wasn't simply a species they could conquer. They were a species that could outthink them, outblast them, and even turn the tide of battle with unconventional tactics. Meanwhile, the humans had found something the Kresk could never truly grasp: unity in diversity. While the Kresk were bound by their brutal and unyielding traditions, humanity was a patchwork of cultures, ideas, and experiences that allowed them to think creatively and approach problems from every possible angle. No matter how dire the situation, humans would find a way out, even if it was against all odds. The Kresk were not the only ones watching humanity's rise. The galactic community, initially skeptical and dismissive of the human race, began to take notice. More and more species began to offer aid, either directly or covertly, to the humans, recognizing the shift in the balance of power as humanity took the fight to the Kresk in ways no one thought possible. With each victory, the humans' confidence grew stronger. They weren't just surviving. They were winning, and for the first time in the war, the Kresk began to question their own beliefs about dominance and superiority. But the battle was far from over. The Kresk were still a formidable force, and their pride had been wounded. The war was no longer a simple matter of annihilating humanity. It had become a war of ideologies, a struggle for dominance that neither side could afford to lose. As humanity struck blow after blow against the Kresk, both sides knew that the war was entering a new phase, one that would test the limits of human willpower and strength. and one that would decide the fate of the galaxy. As the war continued, the dynamics of the galaxy began to shift. Humanity, once seen as insignificant in the vastness of space, was now a force to be reckoned with. The Kresk, who had once viewed the humans as nothing more than an easy target, found themselves increasingly frustrated and disoriented by their opponents' unpredictable strategies. The battle lines were no longer drawn in clear-cut terms of superiority and inferiority now. It was a clash of wits, of will, and of survival. The Kresk commanders were growing desperate after each successive loss. They turned to their ancient tactics of terror, threatening to wipe out entire human colonies to force them into submission. But each time they attempted such an approach, the humans found a way to counter it, not through strength alone, but by exploiting the Kresk's over-reliance on fear and domination. Human resistance movements sprung up in every corner of Kresk-occupied space. From the smallest mining colonies to the largest urban centers, the resistance was a patchwork of different cultures and backgrounds, united by a single purpose: to survive and to fight back. The Kresk were starting to realize that no matter how many ships they destroyed or how many planets they ravaged, humanity would never break. In the heart of the war, a brilliant human tactician named Admiral Daniel Green emerged. His unorthodox methods had already proven successful in the early stages of the war, but now he was given full command of a new fleet, one built on the principles of human ingenuity and adaptability. Under his command, humanity's military might become something different entirely. It wasn't just about weapons and numbers. It was about exploiting the Kresk's weaknesses and using the terrain, the technology, and the environment to their advantage. Admiral Green's first major mission with the new fleet was an audacious plan to strike directly at the Kresk's homeworld, a move so bold that even his own commanders were skeptical. Yet, to everyone's surprise, it worked. The human fleet, using newly developed stealth technology and tactical decoys, breached the Kresk's home system and launched a devastating surprise attack on their capital city. The attack was designed not to destroy, but to disrupt the Kresk leadership. It was a surgical strike aimed at crippling the political infrastructure that had kept the Kresk so united for so long. As the Kresk capital burned, their leadership was thrown into chaos, and for the first time, their unyielding sense of dominance began to crack. On Earth, the news of the attack sent waves of shock and hope across the globe. The human spirit was stronger than ever, and the war effort had reached new heights. Cities once ravaged by the Kresk were now centers of production and innovation. People poured into factories, and civilians took up arms to fight alongside their military forces. It wasn't just soldiers anymore. It was every human, from every walk of life, joining together to confront an enemy they once feared. But victory didn't come without its cost. The human fleet suffered heavy losses in the strike against the Kresk capital, and the repercussions of the attack were felt across the galaxy. The Kresk were furious, and their counterattacks would be merciless. The Kresk mobilized their remaining forces, calling upon their most elite warriors and their greatest warships to exact retribution for the humiliation they had suffered. The galaxy braced itself for the next phase of the war, one that would see humanity pushed to the very limits of its endurance. Yet, even in the face of overwhelming odds, the human resolve held firm. They had made it this far, and they were not about to back down now. The war was no longer just about defending their species. It was about showing the galaxy that even the most powerful forces could be defeated with courage, intelligence, and unity. As the next battle loomed on the horizon, both sides knew the endgame was near. The galaxy was watching, and the fate of the war, and the future of humanity, hung in the balance. The human strike against the Kresk capital had sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy, but it was only the beginning of a far greater conflict that was about to unfold. As the Kresk scrambled to retaliate, they began to reveal the true extent of their power. Humanity's bold move had pushed them into a corner, and now the Kresk were unleashing their full fury to bring their enemies to heel. The Kresk fleet, now fully mobilized and enraged, set its sights on the heart of human space. Their warships gathered at the edge of the solar system, a menacing force unlike anything humanity had ever faced before. The Kresk weren't just coming to destroy. They were coming to annihilate every human stronghold, every symbol of resistance. Admiral Daniel Green knew that the only way to stop the Gresk was to force them into a battle they couldn't win, a battle that would stretch their forces too thin and expose their vulnerabilities. He gathered a council of the brightest military minds humanity had to offer, from veteran generals to young tacticians, and together they devised the most daring plan of the war. The plan was simple in theory: lure the Gresk into a trap so deep within human space that their overwhelming numbers would become a disadvantage. They would bait them with a false show of weakness, leading them into a heavily fortified system that was shielded by a new experimental weapon, a weapon humanity had kept secret until now: the quantum disruptor. The quantum disruptor was a device that could create temporary black holes, small but powerful enough to disable or destroy any ship caught within its radius. It was humanity's trump card, their ultimate weapon, but it came with enormous risks. The technology was untested, and the very act of using it could have catastrophic consequences. The Gresk, with their pride and arrogance, took the bait without hesitation. They sent their massive fleet barreling into the trap, thinking they could crush the humans once and for all. But as they entered the system, the humans unleashed the quantum disruptor. The device activated, and the stars themselves seemed to tremble as the first black hole tore through space, engulfing a dozen Gresk ships in an instant. The destruction was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, as the gravitational pull of the black hole tore through the Gresk fleet, causing chaos and confusion. But even as the Gresk reeled from the shock of the attack, they retaliated with a vengeance. Their remaining warships, now desperate and furious, launched a counteroffensive that threatened to overwhelm the human defenses. The battle was no longer about strategy. It was about survival. As the two fleets collided in the heart of human space, the situation grew increasingly dire. The human forces were outnumbered, their resources stretched to the limit, and the quantum disruptor could only be used a few times before its power ran dry. But Admiral Green and his fleet pressed on, refusing to surrender even as the battle seemed to tilt in favor of the Gresk. At the moment when all seemed lost, a new force entered the fray. The galaxy's other species, who had been watching humanity struggle with growing admiration and fear the growing number of resistance groups, had stirred the hearts of those who had long been oppressed by the Gresk. And now they were joining the fight. A fleet of ships, small, agile, and diverse, appeared on the battlefield, attacking the Gresk from every angle. Their numbers were modest, but their resolve was unyielding as they coordinated with the humans, pushing the Gresk back and forcing them to retreat into the unknown. In that moment, the tide of the war changed forever. The humans had won not only through their courage and ingenuity, but through their ability to inspire others to stand with them. The war was no longer just a conflict between two species. It had become a war for the future of the galaxy itself. The Gresk were not defeated yet, but their empire was crumbling. Their strength fractured by the combined might of the human resistance and their allies. They had underestimated humanity's power to unite, to fight, and to turn the very galaxy against them. As the battle raged on, Admiral Green looked to the horizon with a quiet sense of resolve. Humanity was no longer fighting to survive. They were fighting to win, and they were no longer alone. The battle was now at its apex. The skies above human space, a canvas of chaos and brilliance, where the remnants of the Gresk fleet clashed with the combined forces of humanity and their newfound allies. Every shot fired, every ship that fell, was a testament to the incredible odds humanity had faced and overcome. And yet, as the final confrontation loomed, the sense of impending victory was palpable. Admiral Green stood at the bridge of his flagship, the Resolute, watching the engagement unfold. His mind raced through every possibility, every tactic they had left to deploy. But he knew that it was not just the human forces that would decide the outcome. Now the galaxy had come to their side, and that had made all the difference. The resistance groups from the distant corners of space had answered humanity's call when the fight against the Gresk had seemed impossible. Now their ships joined the human fleet, striking with precision and power. The Gresk, disoriented and divided, could no longer maintain their overwhelming dominance. The final move was upon them. A last desperate push to bring the war to its conclusion. The Resolute and the Allied fleet formed a spearhead, breaking through the heart of the Kresk lines, cutting deep into their forces with precision strikes that left the Kresk scrambling to protect their flagships. But it wasn't just firepower that would win this final confrontation. It was the heart and unity of those who fought to protect their homes, their families, their very future. The combined fleets, once disparate and divided, now fought as one, driven by a single purpose to end the war and ensure that no other species would ever have to face the horrors the Kresk had inflicted. The Kresk flagship, the Tyrant's Wrath, loomed large at the center of the battlefield. Its defenses were legendary, impenetrable to most forces, and its weapons were capable of decimating entire fleets in seconds. But now, even this symbol of terror was beginning to falter. The Tyrant's Wrath was surrounded, its engines failing, its communications cut off as the human and Allied fleets relentlessly pressed in, closing the noose tighter. Inside the flagship, Kresk leadership was in turmoil. Their warriors fought fiercely, but they could see the end coming. Their empire, their belief in invincibility, was crumbling before their eyes. Admiral Green made the call, and the final offensive began. His fleet, coordinated perfectly with the Allied forces, launched a massive attack on the Tyrant's Wrath. As the combined firepower converged, the once unstoppable ship was reduced to a smoldering ruin, its systems failing one by one, until it finally fell silent in the cold void of space. With the fall of their flagship, the remaining Kresk fleet began to disintegrate. Their command structure was shattered, their resolve broken, and their once formidable forces scattered like leaves in a storm. The humans, standing strong in their victory, had proven that no enemy was invincible, that no challenge was too great. In the aftermath of the battle, the galaxy was forever changed. Humanity, the species that had once been written off as weak and insignificant, had risen against the most powerful force the universe had ever known and triumphed. They had survived not just through strength, but through ingenuity, courage, and unity. The Kresk, broken and defeated, withdrew to the fringes of space, their empire in ruins, while the rest of the galaxy watched as humanity began to rebuild not only their own civilizations, but also the alliances they had forged in the fires of war. Admiral Green stood on the bridge of the Resolute, staring at the stars beyond with a deep sense of relief, but also of determination. The war was over, but humanity's work had only just begun. They had earned their place in the galaxy, not by submission or fear, but by standing up, fighting back, and never giving up. As the Resolute moved through the remnants of the battlefield, human and Allied ships working together to clear the debris, a new era began to dawn across the stars. Humanity had declared war on the galaxy's most dangerous species, and against all odds, they had won. Now, they would help guide the galaxy into a future of peace and prosperity, united not by fear, but by the strength of their resolve.